everybody. Here we are, week number 5 of Mark and Pat's Real Estate Power Hour. I like to refer to it as a power hour because we're drilling down very specifically on key terms, and we're focusing all of our energy into a very specific time so we don't get off track. So welcome back, everybody. How are you doing this week, Mark?
I'm doing great, Pat. It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you. And just so that people know, every once in a while, the Australian accent of mine will kick in and I'll say Mark instead of Mark. So I can't help that. It just kind of bleeds in every once in a while.
I like that. I was thinking maybe you had a little gas problem, maybe, and that was where it was coming out from. But
Well,
now,
you'll know if that happens.
even from here, huh?
Yeah, so it's been another productive week, always moving. And this real estate is a very dynamic business. You know, we were talking about schedules yesterday and I'm saying, hey, let's meet at this time tomorrow. And then that changed 15 minutes later when someone calls and says, Patrick, would you come and take a look at my house? I want you to see what I've done here because I found a house I think might work for me. And I think I'm going to be selling this. So that's what threw me off a little bit today where we're meeting a little bit later. So,
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad to know that you're being productive out there and things are going well for you. Um, with things the way that they are in the world right now, it's good to know somebody's working out there and making money, and I'm glad you're doing well. So we're talking to the right person. In other words, what I want people to understand is that, in the luck of the draw of me finding in my friends list of people who are knowledgeable in real estate, and not just knowledgeable, but doing well is a good thing to have in your arsenal of things to teach us with. So, anyways. So we're going to continue on, everybody, from chapter 12 and do another 5 chapters. So chapter 12 through chapter 16 of the let me get this right, the Real Estate Principles book. So starting with chapter 12, the first question I have for Pat, it's this chapter starts off with, and it's titled HUD Advertising Guidelines for Sales and Rentals. So the two things I had questions about were dwelling and also the FFHA. So if you could speak to how that kind of blends into what the heading of the chapter is about, Pat.
right. Most of the things where you're finding with regards to HUD have to do with disclosure and discrimination and so forth. I I rely when I'm doing print marketing on people that are very specific to real estate marketing. If they're going to pump out a flyer or a postcard. So all of those flyers and postcards have all of the HUD guidelines and any specific language that has to go on them right there. I find myself not drilling down too much on knowing the protocol. I use people that are in the business that have to adhere to the protocol all the time, that put those disclosures right on there. So I would always, in the interest of being in this business, you'll find you're not an island. You have a network of people around you, whether it's title people, escrow people, marketing people. Most of my marketing nowadays is not around print marketing. It's around more video, internet related marketing. So I'm not having any specific disclosure around my video. I mean, how I'm marketing properties. If I'm sending mailings with regards to things like that, again, I utilize services that already have the HUD disclosure right on them that reference the specific code. So I would just caution you to always double down to check with who those people are, that they're following the right compliances when they're issuing something. For example, when we issue, when we have business cards, for example, we have to have our real estate license number right on that business card, right? That's a relatively new guideline. It wasn't always that way. But it's something we have to do now. And it's also on an email signature the same way. I just make sure it's on everything I send people.
Right. Well, Pat, to speak to that, how I mean, it makes sense that you're saying, I guess like in any business, you're not an island. You want to outsource certain things that get done by different people, and you want to trust those sources to be, up to date and ethical and all the different things that we have to pay attention to. So that makes sense to me. So you did mention that most of your advertising now is more video oriented. I'm curious, how often do things change in the industry in California where we have to be aware of, like I said, whether it's advertising changes or whatever type of changes that might come in the industry, how In comparison to other states, is California, do we change a lot of stuff like fairly quickly as far as that kind of those kind of regulations and such?
Yes, I would say, again, when you become a licensed agent, you'll join the California Association of Realtors, the National Association of Realtors, CAR and NAR. When you become a member of those organizations, you'll be on their email list and they send out emails constantly. For example, when COVID started, they were sending out guidelines of how we should be showing properties, what the protocol was. Then when the governor determined that we were an essential service, that real estate cannot stop. Basically, people always need somewhere to live. And if they have to sell, they have to sell their house. They cannot be prevented. So we were deemed an essential service. And one of the new disclosures that got pumped out very, very quickly by the CAR legal team was this COVID disclosure with regards to showing. The acronym is PEAD. Okay. And right now, because it's relatively new, I can't just peel off what each one of those letters stands for. PEAD. If I were to think about it, it would probably be property property something, PEA, and then the last thing would be disclosure, property EAD disclosure, something like that. But that disclosure was kicked out very quickly in the process. We received that. Here's the new form. Now there's multiple forms within the CAR site for all the forms that we use. So these things are updated constantly, mostly through lawsuits and different things like that. So you want to pay attention to those emails when they come from CAR or NAR to state that here's a new protocol we're following. Right now, CAR's kicking those out weekly, just stating, here's the latest update on COVID. Here's what's going on. Make sure you're using the PEAD disclosure when you're showing property. Make sure you're following the state guideline, wearing masks, wearing gloves, using hand sanitizer.
Okay.
They're even trying to dissuade you in some way from looking at property. I see disclosure out on MLS all the time. We recommend that you just look at this property online. But my experience is human beings need to see things and touch things they're going to buy. To just look at photos online, that's one thing. But when you're making one of the biggest purchases of your life, you want to go and touch it and feel the energy. So we have to see things. But to answer your question directly, they're kicking out a lot of updates very quickly, and you need to pay very close attention to that. If you're active like I am, I'm out seeing 30 to 40 houses a week every week, and I'm seeing hundreds of properties online every week. So I'm very connected to the market every single day.
Right. I think you made a good point there when you said that people like to have a feeling about something in the actual proximity of, whatever it is they're buying. I can't tell you how many times I saw something online. It looks fine, and I, took a risk and bought it and got it and went, oh, why is it this big? So
Right. Yes.
so I think that's a good point that you're making there. So it's the market a little bit more challenging right now because of all the different, regulations going on. So, but
Yeah, and these challenges, you can embrace the challenge, a number of different ways, right? I always like to embrace challenges as growth periods, right? It's, if people see this as a tough time, great. I'm going to find a way to compete in a tough market. The same way when the market 10 years ago was really tanking badly because of the short sales and the global financial crisis, I tended to do better in that market because a lot of the less experienced agents didn't know what they were doing with dealing with asset managers and bankers. I did. And so it was, beneficial. You have to be ready for change rapidly in this market. Most of the time, the changes happen, they're happening right in front of you. You don't realize you're in a market that's going down until you're 3 months into it and the data starts piling up. But you've been in it for the last 3 months and you're seeing it. When the market started to peak again or move back to the positive side after coming out of the financial crisis in 13, I was working with a lot of investor buyers. So I was right in it and touching it. And I saw it happen right in front of my eyes when the market made this $10,000 jump on prices, $20,000 jump. And I'm like, wait a minute, we're not going down anymore. We're moving up, and there's multiple people competing in it. So I was in it with some very experienced real estate investors at that time. And we were always talking about this market is moving again. We're going to the positive side. What determined this? And we were looking at all the factors in the economy, and we determined that, look, they're manipulating rates again. They're keeping rates artificially low because they know if they let real estate completely sink below this, the whole economy is going to tank. So the market started to peak a little bit. They kept rates artificially low. They tried to move rates up. It didn't work. They brought them back down. Then the market took off again. So it's very difficult to see it when you're not in the market every day. It's so important to you, again, to back to my power hour analogy about what we're doing, to stay very, very present and focused with what you're doing. Because if you're very focused and present, you'll see it happening right as you're in it. It's kind of like being in the pool swimming. You won't know how fast the competition's racing until you're in the water swimming with them, beside them. Then you'll know.
Well, that's why I love talking to you, Pat, because you're immersed in the industry. You have a long history, but you also have this ethic that translates that is like, I don't care what the problem is, let's find the solution and let's figure out how to move forward. Even if it's just incrementally a small increment that I'm moving forward, at least let's move forward. You know, you look at those things as challenges. And I think that's a big thing about being successful in anything is your mental attitude. Like, you know, everybody's going to face, you know, opposition to their goal. It doesn't matter who you are, there's going to be trials. But it's, you know, it's how you face those and what you decide to do with that that make you, you know, successful and allow you to attain your goals. And again, like I'm thankful that, you know, you have that attitude and that we're discussing this online, because I think it is valuable to not only us and myself, but also to anyone listening to not just share the terminology and the curriculum and all of the technical parts of the industry, but also understand that your attitude has so much to do with your success.
Oh,
So
everything. It's, you know, they often say, Mark, it's inspiration or desperation. Both of those needles will move you, right? You're either inspired to do something or you're in a desperate hole and you know you're not going to sit there and you've got to find a way out. Now, the real estate market is not always an up market. It's not always a down market, but in either markets, you have to make a living. So, and times when it's desperate, it's difficult and you have to find ways to do it. I'll tell you one thing that I did. I have a lot of investor clients, but I wasn't really involved a lot with leasing. But several years ago, I started doing a couple of leases here and there because I was leasing properties from my investors, but I wasn't working with potential tenants that were coming in until I started to see some of the tenants' profile. A lot of, you know, we talk about the trifecta, the three things of buying real estate: money, income, and credit scores. I was starting to see components with some of those people that would tell me they shouldn't have been tenants. They had the trifecta in place for them. They just hadn't had a knowledgeable person sit down with them and say, look, you don't fit the profile of a renter. They'd say to me, well, Patrick, why? And I would tell them the trifecta. Well, if you have solid, verifiable W-2 income, if you have tier one lending scores, which are 720 and above, if you, excuse me, if you have assets, 10% down, 20% down, you should be looking to buy because of the write-offs you get by owning real estate, depreciation if you're an investor, all of these different variables that basically you're just throwing to the wind if you're a renter. There are some people that absolutely have no ability to buy just based on they've let their credit scores go down way too low where they're not lendable. They have no disposable money and they may have a challenging job. So, but there are some people that fit the profile. So when I was seeing these credit scores came in, boom, a light bulb went off to say, I can turn this person into a buyer and I can show them how to do it. So it happened to me with several people. I looked at them and I said, you really shouldn't be a renter. And they said, yeah, I'm thinking that's the case, but no one's really pointed it out to me before. So we went through the dynamic. I kept him in a lease for a year. At the end of the lease, I said, let's stop making that landlord rich. Let's stop making you rich. Let's get you into a house now. And I turned them from a renter after a year into a buyer just by pointing it out to them. But that came from desperation, not inspiration. I guess it was both, a little bit of blending. It was just like, well, I'm not going to make a lot of money from leases, but if I can turn someone into a buyer, that's a whole different ballgame.
yeah.
So I take a lot of time now in working with tenants when they apply for my lease properties that I'm leasing to scrutinize those folks and bring them in as a tenant and then point out to them, hey, listen, you really should be a buyer based on your overall package of what you have going for you. So yeah, it's very important to stay inspired and even that way, and to focus and always be thinking about which way to maneuver, because the market is constantly moving.
Yeah, what a great story, man. Because you know what? It speaks to the whole thing where when you look at a situation that might, seemingly be not to your great advantage, and then you move in the direction to make a solution through it, that somehow through that, angling into that from that to that perspective, something will open up and show you another thing to kind of realize, wait a second, there's more here than I thought there was here. I mean,
Yes.
I thought what a great story about, that you looked at leasing, like maybe this is where I wasn't going to make a lot of money here in leasing, and all of a sudden you realize, wait a second, this is a whole nother section of the market of people that I hadn't been able to get access to in this way and thought about it in that way. So what a great
Yes. Yes.
worked out, man. That's really good.
Yeah, and I can, like, very, very specifically, just to add to that, one person that I did turn like that was a young gentleman that came in on one of my lease properties that had just leased. And I said to him, you know what? I'm really sorry. My guy accepted a new tenant for his property, but based on what you sent to me, you have a strong potential lease package. If you are not working with a seasoned real estate professional, I'm happy to earn your business. A lot of people won't do it because they don't make a lot of money, but I do it for different reasons. I'm a professional. I feel like I have a responsibility to help you. So if you want me to help you, I'll try and find a property with you. And he said, oh, Patrick, I'd really love that. And in the course of that conversation, he said, because, probably in a year and two from now, I want to be buying a place. And I went, that's great. But for now, let's get you into the right lease property. And I could tell, my instinct told me, this young man is a hitter. This guy hits runs. He's going to do well. I will convert him to a buyer. I put him into 2 lease homes. That was over the course of 3 years. Well, just last year, I put him into his first house, and that was $1.05 million purchase. So out of just putting him into 2 lease properties, I just converted him from making $500 or $1,000 on a lease to a $30,000 commission on the first house he bought. That's by just taking care of him, putting him into a lease, keeping his credit scores low, keeping his utilizations right in line, watching his income, watching his assets, and putting him into a lease property. Now, he just told me recently that the next property he's going to buy is a business opportunity, and it's going to be a $2 million warehouse. That's somebody that I nurtured from a lease where I made $750. So, that's why you have to always be thinking and then paying attention to the details and the information you're getting to go, this person is not going to be renting for the next 10 years. He's going to be one day buying. I need to keep him very close to me, keep him focused so I can move him in the right direction per his goals.
Yeah, that's a great story, man. I'm glad to hear that worked out. Okay, so let's move on here. Chapter number 13, the heading of the chapter says property-related charges. Okay, and so the things that I have about questions from this chapter, there's something called an as-is clause.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me just run down all 4 of these things because I think they might be kind of like intertwined with each other. So as-is clause, material fact, eminent domain, and then the TDS. So I think they're writing the TDS because a lot of this stuff that we're talking about would be things that you would list in the TDS. Am I correct in that thinking?
Yes. The TDS, if you look at the TDS, okay, I don't know what page it's on right now off the top of my head, but on the TDS, with a paragraph within the TDS states that you're buying this property as is. Now, again, that does not negate the fact that you can, as a buyer, employ 1 inspector, 5 inspectors, or 10 inspectors to come and inspect that house during your contingency timeframe. However, it also means that the seller doesn't have to fix anything per the contract, if he doesn't like what you're telling him. So the contract calls for as is, but it's further reiterated as is if you get a counter offer back to you from a listing agent that says, we'll accept your offer of $1 million. We'll do this, 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 and by the way, we're selling it as is. So they're kind of setting a precedent day one that, yeah, you can find anything you want, but we're not going to make any repairs. So it mostly, it's in the RPA, like I mentioned, but it was mostly really prevalent during the short sale days and the REO days, when every bank and asset manager that had properties, they would all sell every one of their houses as is, meaning what you see is what you get. You can do all the inspections, but we're not going to make any changes, because the bank looked at properties. They didn't really want the properties. They were lien holders. They just looked at, they had an interest in it through a trust deed, right? Promissory note and deed of trust. So they had an interest, a financial interest. They didn't live in the property. They didn't know anything about it. So they wanted to arm's length themselves from the property. They were just getting their investment out, the money, the note. So they would sell all of their properties as is. They would say to all the buyers, this is an as is contract. Bring all your inspectors in. We're not going to make any repairs. If the caulking is cracked, if the floors have cracked, or if there's a broken faucet, we're not going to fix it. That's up to you.
How is that going nowadays? I mean, you're harkening back to the short sale days. How is all of that in effect now? Because I just read something else about this where they're saying the as is clause is understandable, but you should think of it more as is disclosed. What has been disclosed, so that you understand that, this is what the seller has disclosed to you. And like you said before, you can have all these different people come in and make their inspections. But I want to understand how that works nowadays. If I were to buy a house now, and I had all these different inspections happen, and I gave these disclosures to the owner and said, "Listen, these are things I'd like you to look at and hopefully address." What's the general consensus on that now, with the market being the way that it is? How do they react? How do sellers react to that kind of, blowback, I guess, or feedback?
It's more of a buyer response to things. It's a nuanced thing what you're talking about. It does reference it does in effect touch disclosures. Okay. As is doesn't mean a seller doesn't have to give you disclosures. They do. They have to give you disclosures. They have to give you a transfer disclosure statement, a seller property questionnaire, various disclosures. They have to disclose everything about the property on those things. So in disclosing that, it doesn't mean, they're selling it as is. It doesn't mean they're not going to be willing to look at a repair request from a buyer. They're disclosing all of these things, telling you about all the bones of the property, but a buyer could still come in and, say, I did a building inspection and I found $10,000 worth of retrofitting or updating that I believe needs to be done. It's not just maintenance, that it's a code thing, UBC, Uniform Building Code in California, that you should fix these things. Strap the water tank, do whatever it may be. So as is really is not. It doesn't really pertain to disclosure. It pertains more to an expectation that the seller is setting with all buyers, stating, "Come and look at my house. I'm selling it as is. If you see the carpet dirty, if you see something's broken, I don't care. I'm not going to fix them. You're buying what you see as is. I've priced it effectively based on the condition of the house, and you should consider that when you're buying it."
Okay. All right. So I just want to make sure everybody understands when we say TDS, that's the transfer disclosure statement.
That's correct. And that's a disclosure document that a seller gives you within 7 days of reaching mutual agreement on the contract and getting into escrow.
Okay. Okay. So can you speak to what is a material fact and also eminent domain?
Right. Two very different things. Material fact, that's kind of another nuancy thing, right? Because what could be a material fact to you may not be material to me. Kind of a legal term. I disclose a material fact as anything that I see, right?
Okay.
If I see something broken and I know about it, that's a material fact I should tell someone about. If my seller says to me, "Patrick, I fixed a broken pipe a year ago and it cost me $500 to do it, but I don't want you to tell anybody about that." Well, that's a material fact that's been told to me. I have a fiduciary. I have a responsibility to disclose it, even if he doesn't want to disclose it, right? He's told that to me.
Right.
And so if he doesn't want to disclose it, I have to disclose it.
How often,
Be,
how
yeah.
often do you see things where, you know, it's not in disclosures and you're like, hold on, this is happening here. Is that a common thing? I mean, do people, I mean, I would imagine it's probably, again, all over the board as far as how people are when they want to sell something. People who are very conscientious to want to pass on a property that they feel like, okay, we're not going to have any problems with this. I won't have the buyer call me back in a year saying, what's wrong with this? And then there's probably people who are like, I just need to get out of this house. It's got problems. I need to get rid of it.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, there's, my favorite thing on inspections is when we do inspections and the inspector will find 5 things, 10 things, whatever, and we'll issue a request for repairs to the seller, and the seller will say, oh, well, that item that you're talking about, this house has always been like that. It was like that when I bought it. And, and then as we link back to the material fact thing, it's, okay, well, what's material to me may not be to you, and what's to you may not be to me. So even though you're saying it's always been that way, it doesn't mean, the next buyer doesn't want it fixed. So it's a big deal. You should have fixed that thing and taken care of it, because now you've left it that way for 5 years. It's continued to degrade, and now it's even worse. So even though you're saying it was always this way, it doesn't mean it was right.
right.
So, you should fix it. But that comes up a lot to that point that you just made.
Okay, well, also, I have another question that goes along with that. In your own sense of personal inspection, how knowledgeable are you about that at your experience level, and how knowledgeable do you think someone should be about that? When you're doing a walkthrough for a property and you're doing your inspection, how specific are you, and how much would you say you want someone to be if they were your agent? Because I realize there's going to be, people who are experts at these inspections, but then you also got to do your own kind of walkthrough and inspection as well too, to kind of make note of things. Because as I was reading some of this information, I was thinking, how specific does the agent actually have to be? Because you've said this on several of our videos, that your job is to sell. It's not to be
Mhm.
expert in these certain areas, whether it's legalese or whether it's inspection type of knowledge.
Mhm.
But I was wondering, how advantageous is it for you to have a higher knowledge than maybe the average agent when it comes to those kinds of things? That way you can kind of tell your client, okay, hold on, they might not have noticed something like this, but I noticed that this is not right here and this is not right. How much of an advantage is it for you to be a better inspector as a real estate agent?
I wouldn't say a better advantage. As an agent, one of the things we have to do is do an agent visual inspection disclosure. We call it an AVID, AVID, right? That's one of the things that we have to do as agents. If I'm representing a buyer or a seller, I have to do an AVID, which is self-explanatory. Agent visual, keyword is visual, visual inspection disclosure. I have to walk the property, and if I see a mark on the wall, I'll say, mark on the wall by bedroom. I don't say, mark on the wall, roof leak, check with the plumber, check with the roofer, right? It's
Okay.
not I'm not a inspector, and I'm not in a position to make a judgment on something like that. Or if I walk in and see a mark on a baseboard and go, possible, if it looked like water damage to me, I would say possible water damage. I wouldn't say water damage caused from a subterranean leak in the slab, right? I'm not in that capacity to make that detail a judgment, but I am in a judgment position to say, looks like a water leak on the baseboard, or looks like water damage on the baseboard. That's as invasive as I get. I don't get any more drilled down about specifics. Water damage noted on a baseboard, need to hire a licensed plumber who's going to reroute the whole house plumbing, and he should have had 20 years of experience. And now I'm sounding like a witness in a trial.
Right, right, right. So this is kind of like, this inspection you do is kind of like when you're renting a car and you're doing that walk around the car and you're like, okay,
Kicking the tires.
there's a little dent here. You didn't say, well, this could be frame damage because, who knows what that looks like, so you're
Right.
not being as specific, but you do have to make note of it to the best of your abilities, I imagine, right?
Yeah. Exactly. The best of your visual abilities. Absolutely. You point things out. I'm in, I'm so programmed now that any property I go into, my eyes instantly go down and I look around and I look up right away, right? I'm always looking this way just to look for different things because I've been involved in so many inspections. I know what to look for. Water is the biggest claim on all properties, right? It's the biggest, most destructive thing, in my opinion, outside of a fire. But but water can be very intrusive and very damaging. So you want to keep a close eye out for things like that.
Yeah, it's also one of those things that's kind of hidden. You don't even know it might be happening.
Yeah, it could be very, yeah, it could be very, in a very non-impact area of the house, but a very slow drip, and just, it could have been going for a long time.
Yeah. Okay, so next thing, eminent domain. What does that mean?
Eminent domain, yeah, they call that a lot of different things throughout the world. For example, in Australia, they refer to that as compulsory acquisition. Eminent domain in America is what it's called, but it just means that, a government municipality has authority to take your property basically from you. If they're going to widen the freeway, they need to build some super plant or something where you're at. They have the right to seize your property. They have to give you fair market value for it, but they do have authority to do that.
Wow, that's a big deal there. So you want to know that.
Yeah,
Okay.
it doesn't happen a lot. I've not been involved with anything like that, but it does happen if you did your research, did any research on Google or anything and see, eminent domain and see when governments have done that to confiscate land in order to widen freeways or do whatever they need to do, they'll do it. But they do have to compensate you for it.
How forthcoming is that information about eminent domain? I mean, is it in a marketing package or is it any kind of disclosures you're getting that says, yes, this property is, this much into eminent domain, or is that something that you have to investigate as a buyer's agent?
Yeah, I've never had it come up.
Okay, so it's super rare then.
It's just something as a homeowner you need to know that could potentially happen. How rare is it? I would say very. I mean, like I said, I've been in the business a long time and I've never had anything like that ever come up. But I'm mostly working in very established areas, right, where there are housing tracts. It's not some rural area where they need to put a train line through it or something, or build some base on it, or widen some giant freeway. I'm just not dealing mostly.
I imagine it's something just to be aware of as from a knowledgeable point where if you're an agent and someone wants to look at some property, you go out there and you go, oh, there's a military base right over here. We might want to understand what eminent domain means at this juncture as we're looking at this property. Okay,
Hmm.
next chapter we're getting into, chapter number 14. This is a seller's agent and the prospective buyer. So the questions I had from here were, what were more specific differences between fiduciary duty and general duty?
Right. Yeah. Fiduciary is just more specific. General, they're both, well, general, of course, is self-explanatory. It's just general duties you would have, phone calls, follow up, information. Fiduciary is very specific to the person you're representing. Honest and truthful, 100% accuracy on material facts, disclosure, uh, versus just general information back to people. If I'm a listing agent and someone contacts me from the internet, Patrick, tell me a little bit about the property. If the seller has said to me, Patrick, I don't want you disclosing to the fact that I'm going through a divorce or I'm getting a job transfer, I don't want you to disclose that to them. If they ask you, just tell them the seller's selling the house. I have a fiduciary obligation to my principal, right? My seller.
Mhm.
Somebody just making a general phone call, I can give them general property information. Property, yes, is on the market to sell. Here's what the price is. When do you want to see it? Let's set an appointment. But if he's told me specifically, don't tell him that I have an illness right now and that's forcing me to sell the house, those sort of things. I mean, I have a fiduciary responsibility to my principal to only disclose what he wants me to disclose to any prospective buyers.
Okay, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, it's funny. And some of the stuff that I've been reading recently about this, it is speaking to the fact of um, when something is an opinion and when you are stating something as a fact. like you have to be pretty mindful about how you respond to certain kind of questions from your principals, depending upon what that's about, as far as your knowledge of it, how specific your knowledge is of it, because you can get caught up in some weird stuff with that. If you say something and your principal takes it as an actual fact, and you spoke it in such a way, and it's not a fact that you know that you might be like, it's more conjecture on your part, that can be a pretty messed up thing. So I imagine it's interesting to think about. Um, I mean, obviously, when you're getting ready, when you're helping someone to either buy a house or sell a house, and you're in that position as an agent, I'm sure you have, you're trying to get a goal met, for the seller or the buyer, right? So you're either trying to sell the house or buy the house from somebody. You understand? But again, when you're speaking about something and you're trying to sell somebody something, I like that real estate has you caught in a certain sense of not restriction, but constraints to be very honest. Like, I know this is my opinion, because you can get caught
Mhm.
up in messed up stuff if you don't do that, right? So that's an interesting thing to understand, because I think that speaks to this difference between fiduciary and general duty. Because in some of the stuff that I've read, your fiduciary duty seems to have a higher priority, because if you're the seller's agent and you're doing whatever you have to do for sellers and your communication of such, when you are talking to the buyer's agent or the buyer, prospective buyer, you got to be really, specific about what you can answer. Is it,
Mhm.
I mean, when you first started, Pat, how much of that was a consideration? You know what I mean? Like when you talk to someone, because it seems to me that I don't want to be sitting there and someone goes a question, maybe a buyer's agent asks me a question. I'm like, in my opinion, I don't know what that is.
Well, people are always, yeah, people are always looking for a leg up, right? They're always looking, I always say information is power, money is power, cash is king. There's all of these different sayings, but information is very powerful, right?
Right.
If my seller doesn't want me to tell a buyer something, of course it has to be legal. He cannot be telling me I don't want you to do this, and it's completely illegal. Don't sell to certain ethnicities or this and that. I'm not doing that. But if he's telling me something that someone could materially use against us, right? That they knew his wife was going to die in 3 months, and this guy could be desperate, and they were going to do everything to take advantage of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to tell them that in any way, shape, or form. The house is on the market. They know it's for sale. A lot of people will try and get that information right away. I have a phone call to make as soon as I'm off the phone with you, specifically to that. I
Wow.
met a client today who said, Patrick, let's talk about what my house is worth. We did that. We had our eye on a property. First question out of her mouth, just call the agent and find out why that person is selling. Find out a little bit about them, just so we'll know their motivation level and things like that, right? Well, that list agent probably will be pretty guarded, you know, because she doesn't want to divulge too much. I'm absolutely shocked sometimes by what agents are willing to tell me. Because I came from a very hardcore 12 years of negotiating cutthroat deals before I got into the retail side of sales like this. Everything was about getting advantage on deals and up, and when I came over to the retail side, I was absolutely shocked by what some agents are willing to tell you about their clients. And then I'll tell my client, well, she told me that, this client has got to sell by this time next week, or they're going to lose the house. So, so we need to get our offer in now and compete hard. And if we know that, you tell me where you want to position on price.
Right.
It's little bit wild west sometimes. You never know. It's not a uniform procedure. I mean, how many protocols they put in place. The one dynamic is the human dynamic. You're dealing with human beings, and not everybody operates from the same ethics, from the same standards. Um, it's an interesting process.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, I bet you got some stories. That cracks me up.
Tons.
Yeah, thinking about what you just said, because again, like I said, in reading the curriculum, there is all of this stuff that tells you all of these things ethically, and this is how you should act. But then, they try to put it as tactfully as possible in the book as adversarial. And then, they use that word as, okay, well, this is, he's an adversarial participant in this discussion because so on and so forth. And you're like, wait a second, he's just trying to get the best deal as possible and find out as much information as you can without, getting screwed over. And this guy's trying to maybe get, maybe I want to try to take advantage somehow a little bit here because of this knowledge. So yeah, you're right. That human element is always going to be that, that other part of it that you have to look at and a little more scrutinize, probably a little bit more. Anyways, that sounds like, I like the Wild West analogy there. Okay, next chapter, Pat. Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing from chapter 14. What are title conditions? I'm sure that's a broad, topic there, but, maybe more specific.
Title conditions could be a number of things. When you get a preliminary title report, there could be a number of clouds on title.
And cloud being
right?
What?
Cloud being could be, again, I don't want to sound too general here or elusive, but just anything. It could be like a lien on the property. It could be a quitclaim deed that was put on there. It could be anything, right?
So,
and a title condition.
Could a cloud be encumbrance?
Yes, exactly. A cloud could be that. A lien, something like that.
Okay.
And so a condition could be, the title company could be, we need to remedy these three things here before we can sign off on that property, a title condition. We need to pay off the first lien, the second lien, and then the seller can warrant title to the new buyer. Or a title company could see three small liens on the property and say, in order for me to warrant clear title, we've got to not only pay off the first loan, the second loan, but these three little liens that are on here in order to warrant title to them. We can't bond around them or do anything else. We have to have them paid off. Make sure the seller knows they have to remedy those things, and those are title conditions.
Okay, makes sense. Okay, next chapter, condition of property, the seller's disclosures. Okay, so this is more speaking about home inspection and home inspectors. So
yes,
one of the questions I had about home inspectors was I noticed that it says they don't have to be licensed. Out of all the different inspectors, most every other inspector type seems to have to be licensed, but somehow the home inspector doesn't, which kind of doesn't make sense to me because that's a very important inspection. This guy gets to, inspect the plumbing, the roof, the walls, the structure of the whole, the whole house. So I'm a little perplexed as how come they don't have to be licensed. So that's part of the question. But the whole chapter is really more about home inspection. So if you want to speak about that.
Home inspection, right. So like I mentioned a minute ago about as is, so forth on a real estate contract, that it still doesn't prevent you from doing a home inspection. It was interesting to me. I'll tell you a little nuance recently. I wrote an offer in LA and I kept getting countered out on the home inspection from the RPA. I would always plug it in there that buyer pays for a home inspection. It's already within the contract that you have inspection rights. I was just double downing on it, stating that the seller would do this. Excuse me, that my buyer was going to do this at his expense. I kept getting countered out, and the LA agents are like, well, Patrick, we don't ever want that mentioned on there that you're going to do an inspection, because then the lender may be appraised of that and they could request to see that inspection report. So if we don't note it, it's already in the contract, doesn't mean they'll want to see it, which is pretty interesting.
A little
a little what?
A little shady?
No, not really. It's just one way of circumventing that one of the entities involved in the deal is not going to try and undermine the deal. That, the buyer still has full inspection rights and he can still issue a repair request to the seller, but he just doesn't want to call out on the contract that he's definitively going to do one.
But
contract says he can within the 10-day inspection rights or 17-day inspection rights. So technically you don't have to double down and call out for it, that's something a buyer is going to pay for. It's already embedded in the contract. And when I thought about this a little bit, I'm like, okay, I've always been writing contracts for years this way. So, okay, fine. It's already in the contract. I'll just omit it. My guy's still going to do it. My buyer's still going to do it.
you just lenders aware of it.
Yeah, the lender has no right to see it anyway. They're not really a part of the inspection process, right? They're a part of the lending process, so
Are lenders more inclined to lend because they are privy to these, these different inspections? Or,
no, I wouldn't say more inclined because they have to turn over money quickly. I wouldn't say more inclined. Of course, they don't want to lend money on a house that's falling to the ground.
right.
They don't want to lend on a house that's full of termites. But if you note that on the RPA, they do have a right to see those things if they request them.
So that would be up to the lender and their sense of, of due diligence when it comes to like, approving a loan then, I guess.
A lender is more from a structural standpoint, a lender would be more interested in habitability issues.
Okay.
That the fact that, look, I'm going to lend money on a place that someone's going to live at. They better have hot water there. They better have heating there. They better have running plumbing there, right? Why am I going to lend all this money on a property that's not habitable? They
Okay.
would have they would have a problem with that.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. So again, the license thing with the home inspectors, can you speak to that about them
Well,
having?
that's interesting to me. I personally, in interest of full disclosure, was not aware that home inspectors didn't have to be licensed. Um, Most home inspectors that I deal with just a few, and they were former contractors.
Right.
So they have very specific knowledge. They know about the Uniform Building Code. They reference all of that in all of their reports. The fact that they don't have to be licensed is interesting to me. And licensed as what? I mean, what does it mean? Most of the ones that I'm privy to using are all members of their, inspection organizations and all the rest of it. So I would have to do more research on exactly what license, that they're a licensed inspector that has to go through a test in order to become that, sounds like to me.
Yeah, that's what it speaks to in the book. And the fact, like you said, some people are already licensed contractors. Some people are licensed in other parts as an architect or whatever it might be. So they have a different way of kind of approving their opinion, so to speak, when it comes to home inspection. But because they speak very specifically about this in later chapters about it, you don't want to get someone who's inspecting your house who doesn't know what they're talking about and giving you all these approvals, and all of a sudden it goes through, and then someone buys a house, and then 2 months later, all of a sudden the whole, the septic system goes out, and you're like stuck with that whole situation, right? So they talk about this, and that's why I thought it was interesting. I thought, well, all these other inspectors, like the termite inspectors, the all the different kinds of inspectors are certified, but this person here, who I thought was critical, didn't have to be. And I thought that's an interesting thing. But then it says that it's up to you as whether the buyers or sellers agents. So when you're having someone do that inspection, you got to be more specific about making sure that you find someone who does have the qualifications that you deem necessary to give the correct and proper information.
Right. Like I mentioned, my inspectors that I primarily use I know they're all former contractors. They all show a license number on their cards and on all of their reports so that they're licensed with some degree. I don't know what the license is, but I've seen it on all of their marketing and all of their business cards and so forth.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then it sounds like you kind of mentioned before that you want to have someone who is proficient and knows what they're talking about, but not an alarmist either. Someone who's not going to like, nitpick over every little small thing, right?
Yeah, because when you get these reports, it does look like the house is falling down a lot of the time. You know,
I can't wait to buy this house.
the, inspection looks great. Net connection. Can you hear me okay?
I lost you. Go ahead and say that again.
Yeah, so I was saying is see the condition of the house. We then do an inspection. It looks like the house is falling down. That's why but they tend to be a little bit alarmist. For example, when I'm doing a home inspection, if the inspection is at 1 o'clock, I'll have my people come at say 2:30. If it's going to be a 2-hour inspection, or 3:30 if it's going to be 3 hours, just going to issue a report that looks alarming. but he's going to walk you through everything so he can tell you, yes, I have to point out the building codes and so forth. And I'm pointing out these other things. I'm just going to point them out to you to show it's not an expensive fix, but I do have to recommend that it's something you should address.
Right. And you said the inspections can take up to 3 hours. Is that a typical time frame?
Yeah, 2 to 3 hours.
Okay. All right.
They're checking all the major systems of the house, you know,
Yeah.
air conditioning, furnace, electrical, plumbing, exterior, roof, things like that.
Right. Okay. Cool. All right. So we're on to the last chapter here, and this is titled "Environmental Hazards and Annoyances."
Mm.
So I know this is a much larger topic than they're getting into in the book. I think at this point in the book, they're kind of just letting you understand what they are. What they are. They don't go into the determinations as to how important they are to, coming to information at the critical point of putting together an RPA. So maybe you want to speak at it more from that perspective, not so in depth, but kind of as to that these are things you're going to run into that you're going to have to like pay attention to and make disclosures about.
Yes. Well, environmental hazard. One of the reports that a seller gives a buyer is a natural hazard disclosure report. Okay.
Okay.
Natural hazard, same as environmental hazard, in my opinion. It points out everything inherent around that property, a zone disclosure, right?
Right.
Natural hazard report, it'll show flood zones. It'll show if the property is in a 100-year flood zone, a 30-year flood zone, a 10-year flood zone, if it's by an active earthquake fault, if it's in a liquefaction zone where the earth can, go into a sinkhole, if it's by a military base, right? Which would be an environmental issue to know if it was by a military base. It could be toxic waste on a military base. It could have been dumping fuel somewhere. It could have seeped into the ground. It could be into the groundwater. Who knows? So you'll get various reports that will point those things out, what you're close by, if you're by an industrial zone, if you're by a commercial zone, if you're in basically a residential zone, to point out natural hazards with regards to what's located in proximity to that property. So they're all important things to be aware of.
Okay, cool. All right, Pat. Well, you know what? We got through all of those chapters fairly quickly there. So what I wanted to end this with is, I want to ask you, because I know you have a wealth of stories. What's
Yeah.
your favorite story in real estate that comes to mind right now?
Favorite story.
Yeah.
Favorite story. Wow. That's a tough question. I have questions that are really germane to deals. I really like to talk about the successful deals. I mean, like the one I just told you about, the young guy, the young guy who I met at an area Starbucks, coming in on a lease. My property was leased, but I offered my services to help him. He somehow vibed with my personality. I vibe with him.
Right.
I picked up very good energy, put him into one lease. He stayed there for 2 years, put him into another lease. He stayed there, then found a commercial lease for him, for a warehouse for him, and then finally bought his first house with him. Another story I can tell just the exact same way. Another gentleman came in, and this is why I started to go from paying more attention to leases, how it could turn into greater dollars. He called on one of my leases. He was in a lease, and then he determined that he didn't want to actually hire me to help him find another lease, that his landlord sent him a note and said, hey, listen, I'll cut a deal with you if you just stay another 6 months or 9 months, however long it was. And then he said, though, at that point, Patrick, I think I want to buy a house. And you've been so amazing at giving me all this information about the area and things that I really want to implore you to help me buy a house when the time comes. But I'm going to stay in my lease right now. You've given me all this information of leases, and you've worked so hard. It didn't work out for you, but I just want you to know in 6 to 9 months, I'll contact you because I'll be looking to buy a house. And that's exactly what happened. He was an area high school teacher, and he contacted me, and we ended up buying a house. And it was a big commission. I mean, it was like a $700,000-800,000 house. And that came from zero business. That just came from giving him information about leases, feeling like I had a professional responsibility advise him on the lease market and what it could be. He formed a trust from that. And then he allowed me to help him buy a house with him.
Yeah.
And that's about this building relationship thing, you know, and I've had that happen. You know, I could tell you 20 stories just like that, where it started out from just me giving professional advice on information and saying, look, I'd rather give you a quick truth than a slow lie. Here's what the market is doing right now. Here's why I think you should continue to lease and save money. And just building these relationships and the trust. It's so important.
I think one thing that you really show in your stories is that you, being a real estate agent for you is you have a certain sense of ethics in this and in your communication. I think in your everyday communication, when you're talking to someone, you just have this thing about, let me help you to understand how this works so you can make a better decision. You know, I mean, whether you work with me or not doesn't really matter. It's just like, well, let me just help you to understand this better. And I think that that's good because I don't think, it doesn't seem to me that you come off like, let me just see how I can turn this into a sale. You know what I mean? You seem like to be someone that's like, well, no, here's someone just talking to me about this. They know I'm a real estate agent. They ask a question. Let me just help them understand this better. You know, it's not like, you know, okay, well, now I have an opening for maybe getting a sale here. You know, I think that's great. I wanted to add here, Pat, before we go, because we have another 7 minutes or so. It's like, I want to try to add to our channel, maybe what's currently going on with you right now. So we can kind of, it's nice to kind of see something unfold. Like these stories you've told that have happened in the past are great. And I like them, but I think that kind of like a soap opera, we can get like, you know, a weekly like update as to what's happening what's going on right now, because it gives us a peek into what's happening in the market and how it's, you know, how it's working at this current time. So do you have anything like that we can start on?
I have something right now like that. Again, right before this meeting that you and I are on, I met with my client. I showed her a property. She sent me a note last week. Now, this is somebody I've done 5 deals with already.
Okay.
Sent me a note and said, hey, this house I have some interest in. I'd really like to see it. And I said, well, Dina, the only way we can do that is go see it and go touch it. You know what it's like from photos, right? We got to get a vibe. I know that area. I've been in there several times. Let's go and make an appointment and look at it. And you've only been in I put her in her last house, which she's only been in for 1.5 years. And I don't like to do that, sell houses that quickly. I usually like people to be in for 3 to 5 years so we can insulate the money a little bit more. But she was a 20% down buyer anyway. But again, she's experienced, but people understand. I try and impress upon them that, look, I'm doing this every single day. This is a language I speak every day. I know you've bought 5 houses before, but you don't speak it every day and you may forget some things. So let me just tell you, because she used this term about being, you know, I've never not been a contingent buyer before. And I had to remind her that, Dina, here's the thing. You have been a contingent buyer before. There are standard contingencies on the contract, right? There is inspection contingency, appraisal contingency, full loan approval contingency. You've just been non-contingent on selling a house to buy a house, right? So people throw these terms around kind of right, but kind of wrong. So I just reminded her that, look, you have been contingent, you just haven't been contingent on selling something. So this time, if we want to buy this other property you're looking at, you would be buying as a contingent seller on selling your existing property.
Okay.
Why is that important? Because it weakens your hand. You don't have your property in escrow yet. So the house you're riding on, you know, they're not going to see you as a strong buyer because you have to sell your house to buy the house, pull the money out of it. Otherwise you can't do it.
Right.
So that's important. So that's the phone call I have to make after I get off this call with you, is to that other agent, to check the motivation of her client to see, is she in a big hurry to sell? What's going on with her? Is she moving out of the area? I'm going to try and get as much information I can. And then I can talk to my client and say, we need to get your house on the market Monday. We need to price it aggressively. And we need to try and get into escrow quickly and get through our contingencies and then write an offer, because this agent told me she won't accept a contingent offer for the sale of your house. So that's going on right now, live action.
I love that sense of energy when you said live action. So,
yeah, man.
So compelling. Well, who knows? Maybe you'll call that agent and he'll go, you know what? She's got to sell it this week, like the other guy told you, right?
Yeah. Well, here's a term I use in real estate all the time. sense of urgency, never in a hurry. It sounds contradictory, but there's always a sense of urgency for me when someone tells me something to find out everything I possibly can for their benefit to nuance, right? And I'm never in a hurry to do it, but there's a sense of urgency. I've got to get on it right away. I've got to find out very quickly, and I'm not going to rush through finding all this out in a hurried way and miss things.
Yeah.
But there has to be a sense of urgency to you and your personality and your business for your clients. They want information, and you're only as good as the information you give them. So I've got to get accurate information, pass it along. We can formulate a plan, get her house on the market. Like I told her, the biggest holdup is me engaging my photographer, doing the drone videos, all the photos, but I can mobilize very quickly. Once we already determined what value would be, I went to that meeting prepared on valuations. And we determined that, and she said, I agree with you on what the number should be. Now just find out some information, and then we'll proceed from there. So I may have a story next week about, hey, listen, I did put that house on the market and I'm already in escrow, and here we go.
Yeah, that's good. I'm looking forward to that. I had a question here that was going to be a good one. It was a good one. How many deals you got going right now, Pat? How do you keep all this in your head? How do you keep it all straight? Like, when I was working as a musician all the time, I could keep all of my different bands I was working with straight. I could know, okay, these are all the songs I got to do for this band. This is what I got to wear to that gig. This is the time I got to show up. I got to remember what the travel time is. I could have 5 gigs going on in a week and have all that organized in my brain for the most part. How do you keep all of this together? Is it just
Right.
so long? Mark, I've been doing this so long. I wake up thinking about, okay, I've got to hit this communication right now in 10 minutes. Another 10 minutes, this one's got to go out. Another 10 minutes, that's got to go out. And I got my Outlook calendar that says, oh, I got to meet here at 2:30. Because every time we do this, I'm always like, okay, I hope Pat can make it, because he's out there, doing his deals and making money and doing.
Yes. Yeah, real estate's a very dynamic business, right? It's constantly changing. It's not a 9 to 5 thing. It's very different. You have to tighten it down when you get involved with this business, because it can consume you. You have to learn to start and stop at a certain time and put it away, because when you're working, your clients are working. And when your clients are not working, you're also working. So it just works that way, but you need to set boundaries on it. I mean, I have right now, five deals going right now in the pipeline. And then I have, an investor that's coming to town pretty soon. It could be tomorrow. It could be a week from then. It could be, I'm not sure of the time frame, but we're in constant communication with that buyer, because he's bringing lots of money to town on long plays and on very valuable real estate. We're talking like $5 million, $8 million, $10 million properties. So you just have to be very organized and, stay on, set alerts on your calendars and stay focused on what you're doing. For me, that's a strength of my personality. So that's an easier thing for me to stay in touch with all of my people. Like, for example, I was driving today, and I was driving in a location where one of my investors have a property, and I just thought, I need to call him. I haven't talked to him for a while. I've got 2 properties that are going to be handling for him very soon. So I just said, I'm just going to give him a call and ask him about his properties, how they're going right now, if there's anything I need to know about. It's just, my brain is immersed in this all the time. I do have calendars. I do have updates that remind me to do certain things, but I've had full immersion for so long, and my business comes not from random marketing, but from people that I've done multiple deals with. So we're always talking to each other via email, phone calls, follow up, and things like that.
All right. You know what I want to talk to you about eventually in our videos? I'd like to make a segment that speaks to how you create your work-life balance. Because I know you as a personal friend. I know a little bit about that, but I'm sure there are other things detail-wise that other people would be interested to understand from your perspective as to how long you've been in the industry. Like, how do you, because I think this is one thing that in our culture, it's kind of easy to fall into. It's just fall into workaholic mode, where you're doing work all the time. I mean, I got one friend that's doing this right now, and I won't mention, by name, but every time I call this person, it's like, because I'm not a deal, I don't get any love. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll talk to you whenever, whatever. And whenever I do talk to this person, I hear a lot of like, oh my gosh, I'm so busy. I'm so busy. I have been up for like 14 hours straight doing this, and the other. And I'm thinking that's understandable when you're starting, and this is a new agent, so I get that because you're overwhelmed by so many different, different things to do with your business. But that can't be healthy to be that kind of person all of your time. You know what I mean? To where you're working and you barely having enough time to sleep, and everything else is business, business, business. I mean, I get what you said before, urgent, but in a timely fashion. I love that because yes, you want to get your information as a client, and you want to have your agent, be taking care of all of that for you. But
Mhm.
as the agent, you also have to have a good life balance so that you don't start making mistakes if you start doing too much all the time. And it's
Yeah.
not mistakes part, but it's also your health and everything else and your family life and so on and so forth. So I'd like to have that talk with you eventually where we can talk about how you manage that.
Yes, we'll talk about that. That's really important stuff to know because it is an all-consuming business and it will burn you out if you let it. You have to set boundaries. It's about those boundaries, and we can talk about that later. It's a very important thing to talk about.
Okay, so Pat, as far as I know for next week, everybody watching you guys, again, please like, subscribe to our channel. We'll be back next week and we'll talk about some more things. I think at this point in time, I'm going to look at going forward in the chapters again, another 5 chapters. So it would be chapter
Mhm.
17 through, the 5 chapters of that. And then if we have time, I'd like to catch up with Pat on what's happening currently with him, like the story we just found out about, and see how that progresses. And also, if we have time from them, then we'll also go into what we maybe just talked about, how to strike a good life work balance with, your real estate career. So anyways, thank you everybody for staying with us. Pat, again, thank you so much for being a good person to talk to about this and with great knowledge and all of that stuff, okay? Hope you have a
You
great
got it.
best to you and everything that you're doing, sir.
Thank you, sir. You too. Stay focused and look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay, Pat, take care.
Take care.